58% of Americans retire earlier than they planned. The median age they did it was 62. And only 21% of them chose to. The other 79% were pushed out by health problems, layoffs, or caregiving obligations they didn't schedule. That's not a retirement plan. That's an ambush. And the part that's going to change how you think about your own timeline, most of those people had a plan, a real one, a spreadsheet, a savings rate, a target date. They just forgot to plan for what happens when the ambush comes before the target date does. I've been going through the actual data on this for the last few months, the Employee Benefit Research Institute surveys, the Transamerica Center research, the Social Security Trustees reports, the Fidelity and Vanguard retirement analyses. And what I found is not one problem. It's 3 separate mechanisms operating at the same time, each capable of doing serious damage to your financial position on its own. And all 3 of them are on a converging trajectory for a very specific window of time that happens to include the retirement years of anyone currently between their mid-30s and late 50s. I'm going to show you all 3, and I'm going to show you exactly why the standard retirement advice max, your 401k, wait until 67, trust the 4% rule, is critically incomplete for anyone who hasn't also built a parallel plan for the scenario where you don't get to choose your own exit date. Because statistically, the data says you won't. The thing that makes this so dangerous is that retirement planning looks like a math problem. You punch in your current balance, your contribution rate, your expected return, your target date. You get a number, the number looks achievable, you feel fine. But what you actually built is a prediction about how several completely separate systems, your health, your employer's business model, the stock market, Congress, and the insurance market will all cooperate simultaneously for the next 15 or 20 years. The history on that particular prediction is not good. And the specific way those systems are most likely to fail you is hiding in plain sight in data that no retirement calculator I've ever seen actually includes. Here's the metaphor I keep coming back to. You filed a flight plan, destination, retirement at 67. The weather looks clear. The runway ahead seems long. The fuel gauge reads enough. But here's the thing about that gauge. Researchers have been documenting a known calibration error in it for decades. Multiple major surveys have confirmed it reads about 3 to 5 years high. And at the far end of the runway, just past where your visibility ends, there's a mountain range nobody put on the map. 3 years with no employer coverage. Medicare not yet available. A healthcare market in 2026 where the subsidies that used to make marketplace insurance affordable just expired, and a Social Security timeline with a hard deadline that most people think is a distant bureaucratic abstraction. It is not a distant abstraction. I'm going to show you the actual date. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you why the plan to work a few more years to catch up is statistically the most dangerous assumption in personal finance. But first, let me show you the real shape of the problem, because the shape is different from what most people think. There's a story I think about a lot when it comes to retirement planning. A man I'll call Dave was 53 years old with about $240,000 in his 401k and a plan that on paper looked exactly right. He had 12 years before his target date of 65. He was going to max out contributions, stay disciplined, and close the gap. His advisor confirmed the math. His wife agreed with the timeline. He felt on track. At 56, Dave fell off a ladder cleaning his gutters. Not catastrophic, a wrist fracture and a rotator cuff tear. It took him out of the physical portion of his job for 4 months. While he was out, his employer ran a reorganization. Dave came back to find his position had been restructured. They offered him a lateral move with about 15% less compensation. He took it. The job market at 56, for someone in his field, was not what he had imagined it to be. His retirement target shifted. 12 years became 15. He adjusted the spreadsheet. 18 months later, the company ran a second wave of layoffs. Dave was in it. He was 58 years old. He had roughly 14 months of liquid savings outside his retirement accounts. His 401k was not penalty-free for another year and a half. His wife was 55 and had been out of the workforce for a decade. Dave's story is not a tragedy. He figured it out, eventually. But here's the thing. Dave's plan was technically correct. The math was right. The target was reachable. What went wrong was not the math. What went wrong was the assumption embedded in the math that nothing would disrupt the trajectory before 65. In the real world, something disrupted it at 58, and the gap between 58 and 65 cost more than any spreadsheet had accounted for. Here is the reversal I want you to hold on to. You think the problem is that people don't save enough. That is not wrong, but it is not the real problem. The real problem is that most retirement plans are designed around a timeline that the majority of people will not actually hit. You can save exactly the right amount for a 67-year retirement start and still end up short because the actual start date arrived at 61, unscheduled, and nobody told you to build the model around that possibility. More than half of workers, 58%, retire earlier than they planned, usually due to unforeseen circumstances, according to research from the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies. The median age, they call it quits, is 62, 3 years shy of the traditional retirement age of 65. Of those who retired early, most pointed to health-related reasons, with 46%, followed by employment issues at 43%. Just 21% said they retired early because they are financially stable. According to the 2025 EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey, the median expected retirement age among workers is 65. The median actual retirement age among retirees is 62. That 3-year gap has persisted for decades across multiple surveys. In the 2025 EBRI survey, 75% of workers said they plan to work for pay in retirement. Only 29% of retirees reported actually doing so. The plan to bridge the gap with part-time work sounds perfectly reasonable until you're 62 with a new health limitation and the labor market has moved on. Every day, about 11,200 Americans exit the workforce. Most of them did not pick the date. Check your runway. Now stay with me, because this next part changes the actual dollar number you need to prepare for, and it's not a small adjustment. There's a subplot I want to introduce here that I'm going to come back to later, because it makes all of this concrete. A friend of mine, call her Maria, is 52 years old. She has a financial advisor, a 401k, with around $340,000 in it, a target retirement age of 65, and a reasonable path to $800,000 by that date. She believes she has a plan. She is a capable, organized person who has done more retirement homework than most people I know. I am going to revisit her math in a few minutes because it illustrates something important. But first, the triple cost ambush. The second mechanism, the one that does the most financial damage to people who do actually reach something close to their target date, is 3 costs that tend to converge at the exact moment of exit. Each one is serious individually. Together, they account for why. 54% of retirees were surprised by how much it costs to retire. The first part of the ambush is the healthcare gap. This is the window between when most people actually retire, statistically, 62, and when Medicare eligibility begins at 65. 3 years. And here is what those 3 years cost in 2026 specifically. At the end of 2025, the enhanced premium tax credits that had lowered ACA premiums since 2021 expired and were not renewed for 2026. For early retirees, this means the subsidy cliff at 400% of the federal poverty level is back. So anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single person in 2026 pays full price for marketplace coverage, which can exceed $1,500 a month at age 62 in some rating areas. Using the federally allowed age rating multipliers, estimated average monthly benchmark premiums escalate to around $1,072 at age 62, $1,101.80 by age 63, and top out near $1,120 for those ages 64 to 65. Health insurance can represent one of the largest expenses for individuals who retire before age 65. Monthly premiums of roughly $1,000 to $1,100 per person can meaningfully affect how long retirement savings last, especially when combined with other core costs such as housing, food, and transportation. That's $12,000 to $13,000 per year in premiums alone per person. before deductibles, before co-pays, before prescription drugs. Fidelity's research indicates that most couples retiring at age 65 will actually spend an average of $330,000 on healthcare throughout retirement. This estimate includes health insurance premiums, out-of-pocket costs like deductibles and co-pays, and prescription drug coverage. And that number still doesn't include long-term care, which is a separate catastrophe for another video. If you exit at 62 instead of 65, you're adding roughly $36,000 in above-budget pre-Medicare premiums to the top of that stack. And you're spending it in the first 3 years of retirement when sequence of returns risk is at its highest, and every dollar you pull from the portfolio is a dollar that cannot compound. The second cost in the ambush is Social Security timing. Social Security payouts can be lowered up to 30% if collected before full retirement age. The full retirement age for anyone born in 1960 or later is 67. The maximum benefit age is 70, at which point the benefit is 124% of the full retirement age amount with no further increases. In 2026, the maximum monthly benefit at full retirement age of 67 is $4,018. The maximum monthly benefit at age 70 is approximately $5,108. Claim at 62 and your maximum drops to roughly $2,710 per month permanently. That's not a scheduling decision. It's a lifetime income decision. The gap between claiming at 62 and waiting until 70 on a retiree receiving something close to the average benefit can represent tens of thousands of dollars in additional lifetime income if you live into your mid-80s or beyond. And unlike your portfolio, Social Security benefits cannot go to zero. The compounding logic here runs backward every year. You delay past 67 adds 8% to the annual benefit, guaranteed, per the SSA schedule. There is no index fund in the world that offers you a guaranteed, legally backed 8% annual increase just for waiting. The third cost in the ambush is the one that feels least tangible until you run the numbers. 5 fewer years of contributions and compounding. Here is the math on a moderate earner. If you're 55, pulling $120,000 per year, contributing 15% to your 401k, $18,000 per year. Those 5 years between 60 and 65 represent $90,000 in raw contributions. At 8% average annual return, that $90,000 compounded over the remaining period before retirement becomes something closer to $135,000 in portfolio value by the time you need it. Gone if you exit 5 years early. Then layer on the compounding loss on what you already had. If you have $400,000 at 60 and retire at 65, 5 years of compounding at 8% adds $211,000 to your balance. If you're forced out at 60, that compounding doesn't happen. You go to retirement with $400,000 instead of $611,000 from that asset alone over a 25-year retirement. The difference between $400,000 and $611,000 at a 4% withdrawal rate is nearly $8,500 per year in annual income. Every year for the rest of your life. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, the YouTube algorithm may never show you my videos again. So to summarize the triple cost ambush, the healthcare gap adds roughly $36,000 in unreimbursed premiums in the first 3 years. The Social Security timing penalty permanently reduces monthly income by potentially hundreds or thousands of dollars per month for life, depending on when you claim. And the 5-year contribution and compounding shortfall can run north of $300,000 for a median income earner's trajectory. These findings matter because many workers rely on the assumption that they can simply work a few extra years to make up for insufficient savings. That assumption is the broken fuel gauge. Here is the part that never shows up in a standard retirement calculator. And honestly, it's part of why I built something outside this channel to hold the full mathematical framework. Most people who watch these videos know their current account balance. A smaller number know their actual target retirement age. Almost none of them have stress tested what happens if the actual retirement date lands 3 to 5 years early, simultaneously triggering a healthcare premium gap, a suboptimal Social Security timing decision, and a smaller portfolio operating at a higher withdrawal rate than planned. I put all of that into a digital book called The Exit Code, 8 chapters of retirement data research built on 50 years of market and withdrawal rate history, distilled into a mathematical framework for finding the actual date retirement becomes financially viable rather than just theoretically possible. 2 things I'd point you to specifically from that book, given what we've been discussing. First, what I call the $14,000 invisible bill, the per person annual healthcare premium cost for anyone who exits before Medicare eligibility in 2026, now that the enhanced ACA subsidies have expired. Most early retirees estimate their pre-Medicare health costs at $6,000 or $7,000 per year. The actual number for someone earning above the subsidy threshold is closer to $12,000 to $13,000 per person per year. That gap between estimate and reality is what wrecks retirement budgets before the portfolio has even had a chance to show its weaknesses. Second, the dynamic withdrawal framework, because the 4% rule has a known problem for anyone retiring early or facing a longer than 30-year horizon. And the standard fix isn't save more, it's withdraw smarter. The book covers how to adjust withdrawals based on portfolio performance in the first critical years, which dramatically reduces the sequence of returns risk that kills otherwise adequate retirement portfolios. It's available through the link in the description for less than a dinner out. Now, the 4% trap. Here is the thing about the 4% rule. It was first published in 1994 by a financial planner named Bill Bengen, then formalized by 3 professors at Trinity University in a 1998 paper. The finding: historically, a retiree withdrawing 4% of a balanced portfolio in year 1, then adjusting that dollar amount for inflation each subsequent year, would survive a 30-year retirement in roughly 95% of historical scenarios, going back to 1926. William Bengen's earlier 1994 research laid the groundwork, and the Trinity study formalized it. Bengen's own data was rounded down from 4.15%, and it stuck as the default guideline for an entire generation of retirement planning. Bengen himself has since revised the figure upward, most recently suggesting 4.7% as the worst-case historical safe withdrawal rate. He told CNBC in 2025 that retirees who stick with just 4% are likely cheating themselves a little bit of the retirement they earned. So the creator of the rule says it's actually too conservative. And yet, for early retirees, people retiring before 65, with potentially 40 or more years of retirement ahead of them, the math shifts in the other direction. For longer horizons, the 4% rule's historical success rate drops. Many researchers now suggest 3.5% for 35-year retirements, and 3.0 to 3.3% for 40 to 50-year retirements. That is not 4%. It's a 20 to 25% smaller annual income from the same portfolio. On a $600,000 portfolio, a number slightly above what the median American actually retires with, the difference between a 4% and a 3% withdrawal rate is $6,000 per year, every year. And that gap doesn't include healthcare costs, doesn't include the Social Security shortfall from early claiming, and doesn't account for inflation eroding the purchasing power of that fixed dollar amount over a 35-year period. The most dangerous threat to the 4% rule isn't a bad average return over 30 years. It's a market crash in the first 5 years of retirement. If your portfolio drops 40% in year 2 and you keep withdrawing the same amount, you're selling a much larger percentage of a smaller portfolio. This sequence of returns risk can permanently impair a portfolio that would otherwise have survived. Morningstar's 2025 research found that retirees who experienced poor returns in the first 5 years and did not adjust their spending were far more likely to go broke. And now, back to Maria. She is 52, $340,000 saved, target $800,000 at 65. The math under her assumptions works. But here's the exercise I want you to do for your own situation after this video. If Maria exits at 61, not 65, but 61, because her employer restructures or her health shifts, she exits with approximately $540,000 instead of $800,000. That's roughly a $260,000 shortfall before she's withdrawn a single dollar. Then, the pre-Medicare healthcare gap. She faces 3 to 4 years of $12,000+ per year in marketplace premiums she hadn't budgeted. Then, the Social Security timing question. If she claims at 62 because she needs the income, that benefit is permanently reduced by 30% compared to waiting until 67. Then the 4% rule. Applied to $540,000, it yields $21,600 per year in portfolio withdrawals. Applied to $800,000, it yields $32,000. That $11,000 annual gap across a 25-year retirement is $275,000 in total lifetime spending. This is not a math error. Maria's math is correct. The planning error is the assumption embedded in the math, that she hits 65 with the full balance on schedule under her own power. The persistent gap between retirement expectations and reality sends a clear message. Plan for the possibility that you'll retire earlier than you expect. This is psychology of money in action. Human beings are extraordinarily bad at planning for scenarios where we are not the agent, where an external force drives the outcome rather than our own choices. We plan for the world where our decisions determine the result. We underplan for the world where something happens to us, and our decisions only shape the response. The data is consistent and has been consistent for decades. The second world is the one most people actually retire in. Stay with me, because this next part contains a specific calendar date you should write down. Generation X is the least financially prepared generation for retirement by nearly every measure, according to research from the Alliance Retirement Income Institute. While baby boomers dominate the headlines, Generation X faces an even greater retirement crisis, the authors wrote. Here's why. Gen X is the age group roughly defined as those born between 1965 and 1980, heavily impacted by the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution pensions as workplace pensions became less common. Only 14% of Gen X workers have a traditional pension, compared with 56% of boomers. They entered the workforce right as pensions were being phased out, auto-enrollment didn't exist, auto-escalation was a future concept. They had to build savings discipline from scratch with less structural support than any generation before them, and they did it while navigating the 2000 dot-com stock bust, the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis, the COVID pandemic in 2020, and the 2022 inflation scare. Generation X, the first generation heavily dependent on 401k plans, expects to be about $400,000 short of what they think they'll need when they retire. On average, Gen Xers expect to retire with $711,771, saved far short of the $1,116,747 they believe will be necessary for a comfortable retirement. That equates to a $400,000 savings gap, which is the largest among all generations surveyed. Only 16% of Generation X Americans feel they have saved enough money for retirement. When Americans were asked what they considered the magic number of savings needed to retire comfortably in 2026, they responded with an average of $1.46 million. Gen X expects to retire with roughly half of that. Now here is the specific date. A Social Security trust fund used to pay retirement benefits may run out in late 2032, 3 months earlier than what had been projected last June. According to the new Social Security Administration Annual Trustees Report released this month, the report said that if the fund is depleted as projected, Social Security will only be able to pay 78% of retirement benefits. The oldest Gen Xers, born in 1965, turned 67 in 2032. That is the same year the Social Security Retirement Trust Fund is projected to hit its wall. Read that again. The generation with no pension, a $400,000 savings shortfall, a statistical probability of being pushed out of the workforce before their target date, and a healthcare gap between 62 and 65 is scheduled to reach full retirement age in the exact year the system they've been paying into for their entire working lives is projected to cut benefits by 22%. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is projected to go insolvent in 2033, when today's 59-year-olds reach their full retirement age. At that point, retirees will face an automatic 23% benefit cut under the law. A 23% cut on the current average monthly Social Security benefit means roughly $476 per month gone. That's $5,712 per year permanently. For someone already running a $400,000 saving shortfall, that's not a rounding error. That's the margin between making it and not. Here's where the comedic sidestep becomes necessary, because I have been serving bad news at an unsustainable rate. There is an entire industry of financial advisors who will tell you, in response to everything I just said, that Social Security has always worked itself out and Congress will fix it before anything bad happens. And those advisors are probably right. And also, they said the same thing in 1933, 1978, and 2010, each time with decreasing certainty and increasing urgency. The bet that Congress will act is not unreasonable. The problem is that it is not a strategy. It is a hope. Before we get to takeaways, let me close the loop on Maria. About 4 months after the conversation I referenced earlier, I followed up with her. She hadn't overhauled her entire plan. She's not that kind of person, and frankly, neither are most of us. But she did 2 things. She increased her contribution rate to fully capture her employer match, which she had been leaving partially uncaptured for 2 years, because she'd been making other financial decisions that seemed more urgent. Over 15 years, that captured match compounds to a material amount. And she opened a separate savings account she labeled explicitly Insurance Bridge Fund. She puts $300 per month into it. By 60, if her trajectory holds, that account will have roughly $25,000 earmarked specifically for the pre-Medicare years. Not enough to cover the full gap, but enough to demonstrate to herself that she has thought about it, built a buffer for it, and is not relying entirely on the assumption that she will reach 65 healthy, employed, and on schedule. That is the psychology of retirement done right, not perfection. Structural acknowledgement of the failure mode embedded into the plan before the failure arrives. Here's the framework I want you to leave with. 3 things. Specific to this topic, non-generic, calibrated to the exact risk profile we've been discussing. First, stress test your plan against 62, not 67. Pull your current retirement account balance. Then calculate. If I exit the workforce at 62, not because I want to, but because something stops me, what does my monthly income look like from portfolio withdrawals alone, using a 3.5% rather than a 4% withdrawal rate to account for the longer horizon? If you can't answer that calculation in under 10 minutes, that is the financial exercise to do this week. Not picking better funds, not reading more market analysis, running that specific number. Second, build an explicit healthcare line item into your retirement budget before Medicare. If you're targeting any retirement age before 65, budget $12,000 to $13,000 per year per person for marketplace health insurance premiums in 2026, with the understanding that that number will compound with healthcare inflation. It is not in most retirement calculators. It is the most predictable large expense most early retirees never see coming. And if you retire at 62 and enroll in Medicare at 65, you typically need to cover 3 full years on your own. Start a dedicated account for it now, even if it's $300 a month. Third, treat Social Security timing as a portfolio decision with a known guaranteed return, not as a scheduling preference. The 8% per year credit for delaying beyond 67 up to 70 is the closest thing to a risk-free guaranteed return that exists in the American financial system. If your portfolio can support a bridge strategy, living off investments from 62 to 70 while letting the Social Security benefit grow, the math often favors that approach, particularly for people with longer life expectancies and adequate portfolio size. Run that math explicitly. Do not let "I'll just take it when I need it" function as a strategy. And the subplot is resolved. Maria has not yet run the Social Security bridge calculation. I am working on that. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. Check your run.